The John Muir Trail runs through the Sierras in Southern California and has the distinction of being the longest section of trail with no road crossings in the lower 48 states. It begins in Yosemite National Park at the north and ends at the top of Mt Whitney to the south. It's just a spectacular trail, and for most is a life list opportunity. The three of us from the Northeast Ohio Backpacking Club began our hike in Yosemite Valley, and because our first campsite was just 4 miles up the trail, we chose to do a side trip up to the top of Half Dome, which you see here. Half Dome has some very steep cable runs to finish and get to the top, which are really pretty dicey, and was one of the most difficult days of our trip. We did see a little wildlife on the trip. There's a raven, and here's a squirrel eating a pine cone we saw on the trail. There were some small fires that we were able to see on our way up and down Half Dome, and later these actually caused a closing of the trail after we had left the area. The next day we headed to Cathedral Lake, which was our second campsite, and you can see the lake to the left and the meadow we camped in right in the middle of your screen. Just a beautiful spot. From Cathedral Lake, we actually had a descent to Tuolumne Meadows, where we had a resupply at the post office there, and then headed up Lyle Canyon, which had a wonderful meadow by a meandering stream for quite a few miles. Eventually, however, we did get to an up, and before we went up too high, we had a campsite for the night. The next day, as we headed up into the high country, we ran into the kind of altitude we would really have for the rest of our trip, but as we got higher, the views got better. Here's yours truly at one of the lakes that shows the kind of nice reflections we had in many of the lakes if the wind was calm. My two hiking partners were both from the Northeast Ohio Backpacking Club. On the left is Marty C., and on the right is Alan. And they were generally hiking faster than I was, so they were usually ahead, waiting for me like they're doing here in the shade. We passed and camped at lots of lakes, and on this particular day we were headed to Garnet Lake. We passed a lot of lakes, including Thousand Island Lake, which you see here. There were also a lot of really interesting trees, in particular some just absolutely gorgeous cedars like this one. When we got to Garnet Lake, we were very impressed by the reflections, both at the end of the day, which you see here, and in the morning as the sun came up. Just a beautiful spot. The following day we passed a landmark called Devil's Post Pile, which is a basalt formation in which the basalt formed vertical hexagons of rock. Along the trail, we did run into people from time to time, some of which we actually got to hike with for a while. This is a fellow from Donegal, Ireland, named Finbar, who hiked with us for several days at the beginning of our trip. He also resupplied with us at Red's Meadow, and this is a fire burn area that we went through leaving Red's Meadow. This would be a typical view into a valley from on high, and we just had one great view after another of places we were going or places we had been. Since this was the fall, there weren't a lot of wildflowers, but there were a few late bloomers around. Here's Marty and Finbar waiting for me to catch up, heading up the trail.
I generally found that I did best when I kept a steady pace and just took short breaks during the day. California was supposedly in a drought condition, but we found that all the streams that normally had water year-round were running just fine, and we rarely had to carry much more water than a liter or a liter and a half. The campsite that we came to on this particular night was just beautiful, with a full moonrise coming up over the mountains just as it was getting dusk, and I tried to take a picture, and this was the best I could do. The next day was day 9, where we had to resupply at Muir Trail Ranch, and the weather definitely moved in on us that day, and we had rain right in the middle of our resupply, which meant that it was kind of rushed and chaotic. But we got our stuff, 9 days of food, loaded it into the bear can, and moved on, and by that night the weather had improved considerably. There were a lot of wildlife on the trail. This is a yellow-bellied marmot, of which we saw quite a few, and they generally weren't too shy. In fact, sometimes they were downright intrusive. We saw about 1,000,000 squirrels and about 1,000,000 chipmunks, and probably saw some mule deer every day. Above treeline we also saw some pikas. They would not pose for a picture, so I had to borrow this one from the internet. Marty was generally well ahead of me and waiting for me to catch up, but I could always recognize him on the trail even from far away by his red pee bottle. On the hike we went through quite a few areas, beginning in Yosemite, going through Ansel Adams Wilderness, Kings Canyon, John Muir Wilderness, etc. On this, our 10th day, we camped at Sapphire Lake, which was quite a high camp, and you can see where we had our tents, and it was just a gorgeous spot as the sun was setting, and just as beautiful in the morning when the sun was coming up. Often the morning had the calmest water and the best reflections. Just a beautiful spot. Okay, I'm here at Wanda Lake. It's day 11 on the John Muir Trail, and I probably should have been making some videos before this, but this just begged for a video. We're up above tree line, probably about 11,000 feet, and the reflections in this lake are so impressive, and there's just so much reflection that it's impossible to capture it all in a photo unless you could knit together some panoramic shots. Anyway, this is just amazing, as you can see. And we're headed up to John Muir Pass, which I've centered in the camera right now, and you can see the trail heading up there. At the top of Muir Pass, there's a stone hut that was built decades ago, and here's Marty and Alan on the outside, and I've got a shot of what the inside looks like with a commemorative plaque to John Muir. Once you get above treeline like this, the landscape really looks almost like the surface of the moon at times, although you've still got the lakes. Okay, we've come down from Muir Pass, and we're headed down to our camp tonight at Little Pete Meadow. And this is just a really nice waterfall that I'm by here, standing on a rock and overlooking things. And we have a really nice view from here of the valley that we're going into and where we will be heading tomorrow. On the way up the valley, we ran into this rock creature that people had put together from some stray rocks. And that night, Alan and Marty actually used a fire because we were below 9,000 feet for the first time in days, and they were trying to save on some canister fuel. Careful not to blink and you'll see the lizard at the beginning of the next video. Did you see him?
Today is day 12, and we're going to go most of the way up to Mt. Pass, somewhere up there. It's about a 4,000 foot up to the pass, and we're doing about 3,000 of it today. And I'm just panning back across down the valley that we've started up.
Most of the trees that we encountered were pines and spruces, but there were some aspen, although it was too early in the year to see the typical yellow fall color changes for them.
Okay, day 13, and we're heading up to Mt. Pass, which is reputed to have a very difficult south side, which will be our descent. What you see is Palisades Lake. We camped above that last night. And finally, in view, I believe that's Mt. Pass, where I'm headed now. Okay, at long last, we're at the top of Mt. Pass, 12,000 feet, and this is the view on the other side. And if I look down, I can see the trail going down this south head wall that people talk about. Fairly steep with a lot of switchbacks. And over here, we have Marty and Alan waving at the camera. Look at that.
So if it isn't already clear, our typical day would be to go up to a pass, go over the pass and down the other side, and then begin heading up the next pass.
Okay, we're almost to our campsite for the night here on day 13, which will be Marjorie Lake. And what's interesting is you can still see Mt. Pass in the very far distance, which really tells you how far you can go in a day. Okay, it's day 14, and I'm partway up to Pinchot Pass, having camped at Lake Marjorie, which is the lower of the two lakes you can see. Beautiful day. Frost last night. Pretty typical. And Pinchot Pass is somewhere up in here. I'm not sure exactly. I think a little to the left of what you can see. So we've now conquered Pinchot Pass. And it's not even 9 a.m.
Yes, look at the clouds behind us coming our way.
And this is what's on the other side that we'll be hiking down. Hopefully we're going to get to one of the Ray Lakes today. Just looking back. Wave to the camera, Marty. Thank you. Looking back, this is what we came up. Obviously we're above tree line. And I'll let Alan wave to the camera too. Don't want to play favorites here.
Above the JMT.
Yeah.
So after the pass,